As a kid, I loved to explore new areas, like the woods, in town, and you cannot imagine what kinds of things I found. I mean, I could find some money, some old toys, old belongings of other people, but it wasn't until like my late teens when I really got the understanding of the concept of urban exploring. But as a kid, I was told not to go inside old buildings, no matter what. It could have been dangerous. And I never did. Well, not because I was told, but I was scared of kind of things like that. But eventually, it changed. After I finished high school, me and a few friends actually decided why not do our own urban exploring. We actually heard of other local teenagers who have actually explored some old houses. But there was one kind of infamous house in our town. It was only known as the Haunted House of the Woods. It was like this small house was in the outskirts of town. It's alleged to be haunted. And at first I didn't believe it. I mean, I knew which house that they talked about, but I never actually thought of even going to explore it. I was been aware of that house back when I was in middle school. I actually heard from some of my high school neighbors, kids talked about it, but I never even want to even go near it. But that was when I was a kid. But it all changed when I was now in my 20s. You may wonder what the house is so famous for haunting. There are probably like many other haunted houses around in the world. True. But this house in our particular small town with a population of close to 3,000 people. This house was built in the late 60s. It was actually alleged that the man was living there with his wife, and they didn't have any kids of their own. But according to this local story, most of them like maybe like a myth or anything, but this part of the story is actually real. What happened in that house? One day when the husband was out for doing some errands, when he came home earlier than expected, he found his young wife in the bedroom with another man. And according to the story, he lost his mind. He immediately went and grabbed his shotgun and allegedly killed both the young wife and her lover, and eventually shot himself in the basement of the house. Many didn't even believe in his story at all. Like the husband did kill his wife and her lover and that he committed suicide. It's true. He actually did. Even though there were rumors that there was every side of the story that he came home, found his house empty except for a letter with her ring saying that she had left him for a younger man. And it was really on the most popular side of the story, but that one was even real. But according to this story, it's true. They found him in the basement, shot himself after he'd killed his wife and her lover. Many speculate that the reason why he did that was because of her being cheating on him and of rage. Many may wonder if this husband could have some anger issues. But according to some other people that had known this couple, he didn't. He was a very kind gentleman, but it may be possible he did that. But anyways, I heard about this story from other people, and at first I never believed in that actually could happen. But after being watching a lot of news of people these days have done similar, so I was like, well, that may happen. And ever since the couple died in that house, the house was tried to be resold, and it did. The house was sold at least, I think it was like 6 times ever since that happened. But each couple didn't stay, each one that bought the house, they didn't stay in the house for that long. Maybe for, maybe just for about a couple of months. The longest that anyone even stayed there was 6 months. Usually after a couple of weeks to most like 2 or 3 months or so, each one that bought a house left because of the haunting. Eventually, the last couple that lived in the house, they just left. They sold it back into the real estate company, but no one never even bought it. Ever since that last couple, the rumors of this supposed story of the haunting spread so badly around the town that no one even got near it. And even some of the closest neighbors to the house, sometimes even when they drive by there, they can see this dim light in the windows, and sometimes even hearing a sound similar to a gunshot. So it's possible that the husband is repeating his deeds almost every single night. But no one knows. There have been other people been exploring the house, but most of them actually couldn't find any evidence or any conclusive evidence that the house was even haunted. But one day, me, Charlie, at the time was 20 years old, I had asked my best friend Ray and my other friend Lucy if they wanted to go with me to this particular haunted house. At first, Ray was actually okay with it. He always wanted to go there. But Lucy, she was really hesitating. She didn't want to even go near the house or even step a foot inside it. But we convinced her to do so. I told her we can stay there at least 1 hour just to see if this actually is haunted or not. So we did. So that night we packed some flashlights, some recorders, and other things, cameras, just to mean so that we can somehow recording any form of evidence of this haunting. Because we had heard stories, news that the house would eventually be demolished by the end of the summer. And this will be the last time anyone can ever try to get inside and do some exploring. I drove us there to the house. And when we arrived, it was pitch black, like no lights anywhere. When the headlights of the car hit the house, it gave it a creepy aura about it. But we did get inside. Since the front door was missing, so it was just easy to walk in, we decided to stay there from midnight to 1 a.m. And we even had a walkie-talkie with us if we would get separated, even though there wasn't like a big house, but still. First, for a couple of minutes, we walked around in the house, downstairs, even upstairs and in the basement. But since the house was filled with graffiti and other beer cans and all that kind of things, like, we were not expecting to maybe to find any evidence of this house being haunted. But then, around 12:30, we decided to split up. I told Lucy and Ray can go upstairs while I go to the basement. I wanted to try to talk to the husband. Try to get maybe to see if he can actually respond to some of my questions. So we did. I went down the basement. I had my recorder and my flashlight. There were nothing else to sit on except there was this old wooden box for some reason. So I sat on it. I started talking to this husband, tried to talk to him, asking some questions, but still no response. Ray and Lucy did the same thing upstairs, but they didn't have no answers. But as it happened, nothing happened. But it wasn't until like 1 a.m. Well, only a few minutes before then. I heard this creepy voice in my ear. Get out. I was really looking around with my flashlight, like if someone had if someone had been hiding in the basement. But there were no other places there to hide in, like no closets, no open space, or like any crawl space, anything. It was just one big room, nothing else. Then I heard it again. I told you, get out. More angry, higher tone of the voice. I stood up, left the basement, and at the same time, I heard it sound like a gunshot, and both Ray and Lucy screamed they screamed so loud, and they ran downstairs out of the house with me after them. They asked me if I heard that. Then I referred to the sound like a gunshot, and yeah, said Lucy. Yep, I did. Did you hear anything else up there, like a voice? But both shook their heads and said, no. Well, I told them was by my own experience, but I didn't remember my camera. My video recorder may have had it, and I wasn't sure if it was happened, but I did play it, and clear as night. They heard twice. From that day on, we believed the house was haunted, and as the story went on, by the end of the summer, the house was gone and replaced by something else. And from that day on, no more hunting in that spot. So now at least the husband could have some peace, hopefully. Thank you for listening to the story. Hi, I'm Max. I have always had this passion for exploring some old buildings. And there is in fact one particular house in my town that's known as the Murder House. The house was built in the late 70s. It was really just your average family home, except the house belonged to a man and a woman. But the man is the one that is in the question of the story. You see, back in the late 70s, the husband was in his mid-20s. They had recently bought the house shortly after they got married. He was working as a carpenter in the town. Based on the story, what I've been told and heard from other people been talking about it, is that he traveled around, at least in our town and the neighbor towns, and did some work, but then suddenly by one the summer of in the 70s, he started to killing people. They were mostly homeless people, but then eventually moved on to local residents and others. They're mostly elderly, women, and a few men. Total number of was at least, I think it was about 8 people. He only killed 8 people before he was caught. And according to the little stories, or at least of the rumors, is that one day his wife went missing, and he didn't seem to be at least worried about her, that she was gone. But they tried to find her, but no one has seen her like for days, until she was found in the basement of the house. It turned out the husband and the wife had an argue since he was interrogated about it, and he revealed that he hid her body in the basement in a shallow grave. And he was arrested, and even though he took the plea deal, he was both put behind bars for the rest of his life. But less than a year later, he was dead. He hanged himself in his cell. Ever since that day, Many people hasn't even want to go near the house. The house was tried to be sold at least 2 times. But the first time, the couple that lived in the house, they moved out less than a year later because they heard knocking, moaning, screaming, like if someone had been tortured. The second couple that lived in the house, they didn't even live there for less than 6 months of the same reason. Ever since that day, no one even wanted to live in the house. So, and since no one took care of it, it eventually fell apart. It became like a ruin of its old self. Ever since that day, many people actually started looking around this particular house. Maybe I don't even know, but ever since now, in the late 2000s and late 2010s, many urban explorers have been in that particular old property to find proof of this husband that did kill the wife, because there were some people that didn't believe the story at all, or at least they wanted to try to communicate with the wife and hope to maybe get her to move on. But yeah, I did believe this story, so since I literally grew up not that far away from that particular house. In fact, when I took the school bus from back and home forward those throughout the entire years, I passed by the house. Each year it looked even the same. But I also may wonder why never anyone tried to demolish it and build something new. Well, it wasn't that easy though, I thought, but I didn't pay much attention to that. But one day I asked my girlfriend Amy, my best friend Tommy, and his girlfriend Maria if they wanted to do something. And well, this was in the midsummer of particular year, and they were like, "What do you have in mind?" Well, we can do some exploring in that murder house. But both Amy and Maria was like, they were totally against that based on the stories that they heard. I convinced both Amy and Maria to go. So we brought flashlights and cameras to record any of the proof that this was actually haunted. We arrived there shortly after midnight. First, we walked around in the first upstairs and the ground level, and the last at the basement. But then we decided to split up. I thought, why not that Tommy and Maria go upstairs while me and Amy will go downstairs? But Amy didn't want to go by myself, so she went to stay with Tommy and Maria, which I was okay with. So I actually went downstairs, looked around, asked some questions, but nothing answered. When I went in basement, it was still like pitch black, no windows. But I did ask some basic questions like, are you still here? Can you give me a sign if you're here? Something like that. At first, nothing. But then I heard a faint female voice saying, "You should leave now. Leave before he hurts you." Like a whisper. I ask one more time, "Are you at peace?" If you can hear me, tap twice for yes and once for no. Are you at peace? It was then ding, ding, like 2 taps. It was from the boiler in the basement. I realized she were at peace, but she was there to only warn others. I went up to meet the others, and they were about to walk it downstairs from upstairs to the first floor. They asked me if I heard anything. I did, but I wasn't sure if it was caught on the camera, but it was. But the voice wasn't, but the sound were. From that day, we all believed in the stories. Eventually, from what I heard, that the house was eventually bought and was torn down, and a new house was built top of that. And from what I understand, the haunting has stopped. I really wondered if we had even been there. Could we have caught any of this proof? I mean, me and Tommy were actually believers in the paranormal. Amy and Maria was not really much of the believers, but after this bit, after my recording, they have a different changed of mind on that. Thank you for all listening for the story. Thank you. Hi, I'm Peter. I'm a strong believer in the supernatural and the paranormal. I've always been as such that since ever watching the Ghost Adventures, the Poltergeist. I love that type of things. But I always wondered, is there any place in my town that has any buildings that's haunted or not? Well, I wasn't really sure. So, when I was about in my late teens, I actually asked one of my friends if they had ever heard of any particular haunted place. Well, I actually got a jackpot. A friend of mine told me that his brother knew of one place. So, when I went over to his place, his older brother did mention that there is an old farmhouse in the outskirts of our town. It had been abandoned since the 1980s, and it was actually really haunted, according to his words. He told me that he had been there at least twice, and each time he was freaked out. He had told me that there had been a few other people out there doing some exploring, but since the farmhouse was now in a bad condition, not many people had even dared even go inside. Based on what he told me then, the house roof was almost collapsed in. So it was a really dangerous to even anyone even dare to go in there. As many urban explorers has this like the main rule, don't go inside a building if it's too risky for your life. But I wanted to go see at least. So I asked him about where it's located. And he told me it was about 2 to 3 miles outside town, near this big old cornfields. And I knew exactly where he meant. So I decided to look up more into this. Because when I asked him why it was this alleged haunted, he didn't tell me, only that it were. But he probably has, perhaps he knew about it, but he didn't want to tell me because he thought maybe I was been scared. So I went to the local library a couple of days later just to see if there was any mention of old newspapers. Well, I hit the gold mine. In one of the articles in the one newspaper from that particular year, from the 80s, it did mention it was actually alleged that a cult hang around in that particular old farmhouse. They apparently did some rituals, like they sacrificed many animals like chickens, goats, and according to the list from the article, that they have found at least 2 people being sacrificed. But there were apparently 2 members that was willing sacrificed. But ever since that day, the haunting went on too bad. Apparently, this cult, what they have been sacrificing for so many times, apparently had dropped some demonic presence or at least dark forces, which apparently scared them themselves so much that they abandoned the place. Ever since then, they had never even been there. I wonder if it's still haunted though. I was curious to go there, but this was the time when I started going to college, so I didn't have enough time to go there. But then, a couple of years after I finished college, I was eager to go back home. My best friend Caleb had asked me if I wanted to go with town to the bar, and I said yes, why not? So there we drank and talked about old childhood memories. But then one thing came up in my mind, the, the alleged haunted farmhouse. I told him about it, and I asked him if he would be interested to go there with me. And I wasn't sure if he said yes, but he said, sure. I will always want to go there, but never wanted to do it myself. So we had actually decided to ask our girlfriends, Nikki and his girlfriend Maria, if they wanted to go with us to this old haunted house. They were actually not they were actually okay with this. So we made plans for about a week later, so we did. We actually met up by our cars at the place, and sure enough, the house was even more worse condition as it was years earlier, based on what was told. The roof had completely collapsed inside, but part of the house was still at least standing. I told them we wouldn't be staying there for too long. So we walked around. That were in the part of the house was still at least imaginable to be walking around. But there were nothing else to even to do. Like the house was almost gone. So we decided why not to do this own questioning. We started asking if there's anyone here, but it didn't take long for any other sound to be heard. We heard this one loud sound echoing. Both the girls freaked out, looked at each other and asked if we were the one that made the sound. But we shook our heads and said no, we were freaked out as well. And we heard the sound again and again. And we decided we didn't want to stay there any longer. So we literally just took off, ran to our cars, and took off. And I don't kidding you, but as we were leaving, I could somehow, I said, I saw two red eyes in the window looking out like they were red of fire. But then it was just one there for 1 second and gone the next. We now believe it is haunted. We had never even been there. So everyone, thank you for listening to the story. Thank you. There are many abandoned buildings in our town. One old factory, some old abandoned farms, and even some old houses scattered out in different places. We have always been wondered why haven't some of those places been torn down if they have been abandoned for years or even decades, especially that old factory. It had been closed down since the late 1940s, and it's just still standing there and it isn't. If were plans of restoring it to something else, but eventually abandoned. So why not tearing it down? I mean, it's not like a culture protected building or anything. So, yeah. My name is Daniel. I have always been interested in exploring some old buildings in our town. So I decided why not one day to do some exploring in an old abandoned building. But there were actually just one abandoned building not far from where I lived, maybe just a couple of blocks away from from my house. So I convinced my best friend Carl, my girlfriend Gina, and Lisa, Carl's girlfriend, to do some exploring in this old house. Even though the girls were really much not interested in first, but we said we would just be there for only less than half an hour, do some, just looking around. This house wasn't haunted or anything. Like it just had been lived by itself, and no one had lived there for years, and no one took care of it. Just I was curious to see what was actually inside. So we agreed. We left our house, and this was around the fall. We actually left our house around 7 p.m. If I remember, this was just about a couple of weeks before actual Halloween. So We did arrive and explore the area in the house, but we weren't even there for even less than a half an hour that we had originally planned. As we were walking around, the house was not, at least the outside was in bad condition, but the inside was not if it's as bad as I thought it would be. But like I said, we weren't even there for not even 30 minutes. Not because of the house collapsed or anything, but it was a man living there. The man was so freakingly pissed off at us. So he yelled at us like, "Leave my house now!" He screamed. That terrified both Lisa and Gina. And me and Carl, well, let's say we were normally a tough guys, but yeah, we bailed. We ran out the house and we told us each other never go back there. And I kind of also lost interest to do some more urban exploring or lives like that in the future. So yeah, that was my story of how me, Gina, Carl, and Lisa were tend to do exploring, but ended the same day. Thank you for listening. Hi, I'm Lucas. I have always had this big interest to explore some old abandoned buildings. In fact, there are plenty of those in my town. And there are like an old abandoned hospital, an old factories, and many abandoned buildings. And ever since I finished high school with my best friends, Roy and Larry, we had explored at least a few of those buildings. And we never actually ran into any problems at all. It had happened at least on two occasions that we explored the old abandoned hospital that we ran into other urban explorers. We actually talked with them for just a brief moment about what we had seen and what they had seen, and we shared some experience. That happened actually both two times. But there's only one time that me and my friends were really terrified and chased out of one particular building. Me and my best friends, Roy and Larry, had often been called the Three Musketeers. Yeah, we were basically inseparable. We didn't even go to college though, but yeah, even though we have our own jobs and all that, but it happened occasionally that we met up sometimes at the bar just to small talk about our old urban exploring days. Ever since we finished high school and we were around maybe around between 19 and 20, we had not literally stopped doing some exploring for a while. But one day when we were met up at the bar after one work day, I was like, guys, why not to do some exploring? And Larry was like, you know what? There have been quite a while since we even did that. I mean, I did miss those old days. Roy was like, yep, it was a great time. Remember a hospital? Oh yeah, that was a good place, said Larry. Yeah, but which place are we exploring? There are not many left. And said Roy. And he was right. Many abandoned buildings had been torn down. But then Larry mentioned there is one not far from his childhood neighborhood. It was an old family house, apparently which had been abandoned for at least for the past few years. The last couple that lived there moved out because they didn't have enough, couldn't pay rent anymore. And it had been squatted for a couple of times, and so it was like, why not that place? Yeah, at least maybe there can be something. So we made plans to meet up in a few days later, and about a week later, during the Friday after we had finished work, we actually met up outside Larry's house. He was still living in this old childhood home. Actually, his parents gave this house to him. So we did meet up and we walked to the house where he talked about. And it was just your average family home. Like ground floor, no basement or anything, but just it was just like that. And this the house? Yep, this the house, said Larry with a big smile. Well, it doesn't look that scary. What do you mean? Said Larry. Well, I mean, it doesn't look scary. It look more like, you know, freaky. Is there a difference? Probably not. But hey, let's go inside. Since the door is boarded up, I know the back doors probably won't be that. Are you sure? Yeah, last time I saw it was all completely gone. So we walked around the house. Sure enough, the back door was gone. So we walked in and we did some exploring, but we weren't even in there for that long because shortly after we started looking around, we heard some sounds and we heard and saw this long, dirty haired man somehow rose up from the floor. Apparently, he was sleeping on the floor in this old living room and told us, "Get out of my house! No!" He screamed. Well, since me and Lucas and Roy and Larry are pretty big guys, like 6 feet tall and all, but this guy was apparently maybe a slight taller than us, and even though he appeared to be a bit homeless, but we didn't want to take the risk. So we apologized and we ran out. He even chased us, but he stopped after we had run out from the sidewalk. We made a deal never to do that again, and that marked our urban exploring days officially over. Yeah, so thank you all for listening to my story. Thank you.